The Monday morning that changed everything started with a knock on my truck window, so aggressive, I thought someone was trying to break in. I looked up from my coffee to see Linda Patterson's face pressed against the glass, her perfectly manicured nails tapping like she was sending Morse code. I rolled down the window of my 2018 Peterbilt, which I'd parked outside the Meadowbrook Estates Community Center in Henderson, Nevada, just outside Las Vegas proper. "Ethan Crawley, we need to talk," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut steel. Linda was the HOA president, a woman in her late 40s with blonde highlights that probably cost more than my monthly truck payment, and an expression that suggested she'd been born irritated. "Morning to you too, Linda," I said, taking another sip of my coffee. "What's the problem?" "The problem is that your services are no longer required by the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, effective immediately." I actually laughed. I couldn't help it. "You're joking, right?" "Do I look like I'm joking?" She crossed her arms over her designer blouse. "The board held an emergency meeting last night, and we've decided to terminate our contract with Crawley Waste Management." I set my coffee down in the cup holder and climbed out of the truck, standing at my full 6'2". Linda backed up a step, which gave me a small amount of satisfaction. "Linda, you realize I'm the only licensed waste hauler in Clark County that services this area, right? The county has exclusive service zones. You can't just hire anyone with a truck." "We're aware of the regulations," she said, though her voice wavered slightly. "We've made arrangements." "What arrangements?" "That's none of your concern anymore. Please collect your equipment from the collection points and vacate the premises." I looked around at the sprawling planned community with its 350 homes, all neatly arranged along winding streets with names like Sunset Meadow Drive and Prosperity Lane. I'd been servicing this HOA for 6 years, ever since I'd bought the route from the previous owner when I was 28. Now at 34, this account represented about 40% of my business revenue. Losing it would hurt, but it wouldn't break me. I had other commercial accounts and residential routes in North Las Vegas. "You need to give me 30 days' notice according to our contract," I said calmly. "Section 12, Paragraph 3, Linda's face reddened. "We're invoking the immediate termination clause for unsatisfactory service." "What unsatisfactory service? I've never missed a pickup in 6 years. You were late last Tuesday." "I was 15 minutes late because there was a 6-car pileup on the I-215. I called your office and left a message. Regardless, the decision has been made. You'll receive a formal letter by certified mail." She turned on her heel and walked toward the community center, her heels clicking on the pavement. I stood there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. Then I pulled out my phone and called my lawyer, Marcus Rivera. He'd handled the contract when I'd first signed on with Meadowbrook Estates. "Marcus, it's Ethan. The Meadowbrook HOA just tried to fire me." "Tried to," they said, effective immediately. I told them about the 30-day clause. "Hold on, let me pull up your contract." I heard typing in the background. "Okay, yeah, they can invoke immediate termination only for breach of contract, which requires documented evidence of repeated failures to perform. Being late once because of a traffic accident doesn't count. Did they give you anything in writing?" "Said it's coming by certified mail." "Don't sign for it. Actually, you know what? Sign for it, but don't agree to anything. Forward it to me immediately. In the meantime, continue your normal service schedule. They need to prove breach, and they can't." I thanked him and hung up, then climbed back into my truck. I had other routes to run that day, including a commercial complex in downtown Henderson and a residential area near Lake Las Vegas. The Meadowbrook situation gnawed at me, though. Why would they suddenly want to fire me? Our rates were competitive. My service was reliable, and I'd even given them a discount last year when the HOA had some budget issues. The answer came 3 days later, when I was having lunch at a diner on Sunset Road. Tommy Brennan, who lived in Meadowbrook and ran a plumbing business, slid into the booth across from me. "Heard you got canned by the HOA," he said. "Word travels fast. Linda's telling everyone who'll listen, says you were unreliable and overpriced." I set down my burger. "That's not even close to true." "I know that. Everyone knows that. But here's the thing, her nephew just started a junk hauling business, some fly-by-night operation with a couple of pickup trucks. She's been pushing the board to give him the waste management contract." Everything clicked into place. Her nephew isn't licensed for residential waste hauling, is he? No idea, but I doubt it. Those licenses are hard to get, right? Nearly impossible. Clark County only issues them for specific service zones, and they require proof of proper disposal procedures, environmental compliance, insurance, bonding. It takes months and costs about $50,000 in fees and equipment upgrades. Tommy whistled. "So what are you going to do?" "Keep servicing my route until they physically stop me or a judge tells me otherwise." That's exactly what I did. Thursday morning, I showed up at Meadowbrook Estates at 6 a.m. sharp, same as always. My crew of 3 guys, all good workers who'd been with me for years, started emptying the bins at the collection points throughout the neighborhood. We were about halfway through when Linda's silver BMW came screaming around the corner. She jumped out, still in her bathrobe. "What do you think you're doing?" "My job," I said. "I have a contract to fulfill, and you haven't provided legal grounds for termination. I told you your services aren't needed. And my lawyer told me that I'm obligated to continue service until the contract is properly terminated with appropriate notice and documentation. I'm actually protecting you here, Linda. If I stop service and your residents' trash piles up, they could sue the HOA." Her face went through several shades of red. "I'm calling the police." "Go ahead. I'm not trespassing. I have a valid contract and I'm performing my contractual duties." She did call the police. Officer Ramirez showed up 20 minutes later, looking tired and annoyed. I showed him my contract, explained the situation, and he looked at Linda with an expression that suggested he'd dealt with her before. "Madam, this is a civil contract dispute. He's right that he has a valid agreement to provide service. If you want him removed, you need to go through the courts." "But he's harassing me. He's emptying trash cans. That's not harassment." Officer Ramirez turned to me. "Continue your work, Mr. Crawley. Madam, I suggest you contact your HOA's attorney." Linda called me 3 times that day, each call more shrill than the last. I didn't answer. Then she sent me an email threatening legal action if I didn't cease operations immediately. I forwarded it to Marcus, who sent back a reply that made me smile. He drafted a letter explaining that premature termination would constitute breach of contract on the HOA's part and could result in damages equal to the remaining contract value, approximately $120,000. Friday morning, I arrived to find that someone had padlocked the gates to the collection point areas. I called Marcus again. "Can they do that?" I asked. "Nope. That's interference with contractual services. Document everything, take photos, and send me a bill for your time." This is getting better and better for your case. I took extensive photos and videos, then sent an email to the HOA board explaining that blocking access to collection points violated our agreement and created a health hazard. I also sent a courtesy email to the Clark County Health Department, noting that waste removal services were being interfered with at a residential community. That got their attention. The health department doesn't mess around in Nevada. especially in the summer heat when trash can become a serious health issue. An inspector showed up Monday morning, took one look at the locked gates and the trash starting to pile up, and issued a notice of violation to the HOA. My phone rang within an hour. It was Gerald Thompson, the HOA vice president and one of the more reasonable board members. "Ethan, we need to talk about this situation." "I'm listening, Gerald." Linda made some decisions that maybe weren't fully thought through. "The board would like to meet with you to discuss a resolution." "I'm happy to meet." "When and where?" "Tonight, 7 p.m. Community Center." I showed up at 6:55, Marcus by my side. The community center conference room was set up like a courtroom, with the 5 board members sitting at a long table. Linda sat in the middle, flanked by Gerald and 3 other members I recognized: Patricia Gomez, Robert Chen, and Sandra Mitchell. About 20 residents filled the chairs behind us. Apparently word had spread that there was going to be drama. Linda called the meeting to order with a sharp bang of her gavel. "We're here to discuss the ongoing dispute with Crawley Waste Management." Marcus stood up. "Before we begin, I'd like to clarify that Mr. Crawley is here in good faith to resolve this matter, but he maintains that the HOA's attempted termination was improper and potentially illegal." "The board has authority to make vendor decisions," Linda snapped. "The board has authority to terminate contracts according to the terms of those contracts," Marcus corrected. "You failed to follow those terms. Additionally, by locking collection areas, you've interfered with services, created a health hazard, and violated county health codes. The violations alone could cost the HOA $20,000 in fines." Robert Chen, a quiet accountant who rarely spoke at meetings, cleared his throat. "Linda, is it true your nephew was supposed to take over the waste management contract?" The room went silent. Linda's face turned bright red. "That's irrelevant." "It's extremely relevant," Patricia said, her voice cold. "That's a conflict of interest. If you were planning to give your nephew a contract, you should have recused yourself from the decision." "My nephew's company submitted a bid." "Where is this bid?" Gerald interrupted. "I never saw any bid. Did anyone else see a bid?" The other board members shook their heads. "It was discussed in executive session," Linda said weakly. "There was no executive session scheduled or held," Sandra Mitchell said, flipping through a notebook. "I keep the minutes." "The last meeting we had was the regular monthly meeting 2 weeks ago, and waste management wasn't even on the agenda." The residents behind us started murmuring. Someone shouted, "Did you call an illegal meeting?" Gerald held up his hand. "Let's focus on resolving this." "Ethan, what would it take to continue your services?" I'd thought about this carefully. "I want the remainder of my contract honored with no interference. That's 18 months. I also want reimbursement for my time and legal fees dealing with this situation, which currently amounts to about $8,000. And I want a written apology from the board acknowledging that the termination attempt was improper." "That's outrageous," Linda said. "What's outrageous is that you tried to give a contract to your unqualified nephew," Patricia shot back. "Ethan, is the nephew even licensed?" I checked. "No, he's not. He has a business license for junk hauling, which is different from waste management. If he'd started picking up residential trash, he would have been operating illegally, and the HOA would have been liable." Robert Chen pulled out his calculator. "If Ethan sues us for breach of contract and wins, we're looking at potentially $120,000 plus legal fees. $8,000 to settle this is a bargain. I move that we accept Ethan's terms." "Second," Patricia said immediately. Linda looked around the table desperately. "You can't just all in favor," Gerald said. 4 hands went up. Linda sat with her arms crossed, her face a mask of fury. "Motion carries," Gerald said. Ethan, we accept your terms. Marcus, can you draft a settlement agreement? I'll have it to you by Thursday, Marcus said. As we walked out, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The residents gave me a small round of applause, and several came up to shake my hand and apologize for the hassle. Your service has always been great, Tommy Brennan said. We're glad this got sorted out, but I knew it wasn't over. Linda Patterson didn't strike me as someone who accepted defeat gracefully. Tuesday morning, I arrived for my regular route and found that not only were the gates unlocked, but someone had actually organized the collection points better than they'd ever been. Gerald had left me a voicemail apologizing again, and saying he'd personally ensured everything was accessible. I was emptying a collection point on Prosperity Lane when a white pickup truck pulled up with Patterson Hauling painted on the side in crude letters. A kid who couldn't have been more than 25 jumped out. Hey, you need to leave, he said. I'm taking over this route. You're Linda's nephew. Yeah, Derek Patterson. Aunt Linda gave me this contract. I pulled out my phone and showed him the email from Gerald confirming our settlement. The HOA board voted to continue my services. Your aunt doesn't have authority to give you this contract, and even if she did, you're not licensed for residential waste management. That's bull. I can haul whatever I want. No, you can't. Clark County requires a specific license for residential waste management in designated service zones. If you start operating without one, you'll be hit with fines of up to $5,000 per day, and I'll report you to the county immediately. Derek got back in his truck, his face red with anger, and peeled out. I called Marcus to give him a heads up. Document everything, he said. If he shows up again, call the county licensing board. Derek did show up again Wednesday morning. This time, he had 2 of his friends with him, and they started trying to empty bins before my crew could get to them. I called the county licensing board's enforcement division and explained the situation. They said they'd send someone out. The enforcement officer arrived within an hour, a no-nonsense woman named Janet Kowalski, who took one look at Derek's operation and started writing citations. You're operating an unlicensed waste hauling business in a restricted service zone, she told Derek. That's a $5,000 fine for today, plus another $5,000 per day if you continue. You need to cease operations immediately. But my aunt said, I don't care what your aunt said. You're breaking county law. Stop now or I'll have your truck impounded. Derek and his friends left and I didn't see them again. But that evening I got a call from an unknown number. You've made a big mistake, a man's voice said. Who is this? Someone who doesn't like people who stick their nose where it doesn't belong. Drop the contract and leave Meadowbrook. Is this Derek? The line went dead. I immediately called the police and filed a report about the threatening call. Officer Ramirez took my statement and said they'd look into it. Thursday morning brought a new development. I arrived at Meadowbrook to find graffiti sprayed across my truck. Get out in red paint. My tires had been slashed and someone had poured sugar in my gas tank. The damage was easily $10,000. I called the police again, and this time they sent Detective Sarah Vaughn, who specialized in property crimes. She took photos, dusted for prints, and pulled security footage from nearby houses. The footage showed Derek's white pickup truck driving through the neighborhood around 3 a.m., stopping near where I'd parked my truck. That's pretty clear evidence, Detective Vaughn said. We'll bring him in for questioning. What about Linda Patterson? She had to know about this. Unless we can prove she was involved in planning or executing the vandalism, we can't charge her. But her nephew is looking at felony criminal mischief, which carries up to 4 years in prison given the dollar amount. Derek was arrested Friday morning. Linda showed up at the police station screaming about false charges and harassment, which apparently didn't help her nephew's case. He was released on bond but ordered to stay away from me and Meadowbrook Estates. That should have been the end of it, but Linda wasn't done. Saturday morning, I received a certified letter from the HOA claiming that I'd violated the terms of our settlement by creating a hostile environment, and demanding that I pay the HOA $15,000 in damages. Marcus read the letter and actually laughed. This is absurd. They have no grounds whatsoever. Her nephew vandalized your truck. You're the victim, and she's trying to twist it around. I'll respond to this, but honestly, I think she's just lashing out because she knows she lost. The HOA held an emergency meeting the following Tuesday. I wasn't invited, but Gerald called me afterward. Linda has been removed as president, he said. The board voted 4-1 to remove her from leadership and revoke her authority to make unilateral decisions. I'm the new president, and I want to personally apologize for everything you've been through. I appreciate that, Gerald. We'd also like to extend your contract. You've been professional throughout this nightmare, and we want to keep you as our waste management provider for the long term. How does a 5-year contract sound with annual rate adjustments for inflation? That sounds fair. Have Marcus and your attorney work out the details. Will do. And Ethan, thank you for not walking away. A lot of people would have just said it wasn't worth the hassle. It was worth it, I said. I don't like being pushed around. Derek's criminal case moved forward. His attorney tried to argue that the security footage was inconclusive, but the paint on Derek's truck matched the paint sprayed on mine, and his fingerprints were found on my truck's door handle. He pleaded guilty to reduced charges of criminal mischief and was sentenced to 18 months probation, 300 hours of community service, and ordered to pay restitution of $12,000 for the damage. Linda tried to appeal her removal as HOA president, but the board's decision was upheld by the association's bylaws. She ended up selling her house in Meadowbrook 3 months later and moving to Arizona. Gerald told me she'd been threatening to sue everyone involved, but her attorney apparently talked her out of it. The new contract with Meadowbrook was signed in October, 5 months after the whole mess started. It was actually a better deal than my original contract, with higher rates and a clause that required 60 days' notice for termination and mandatory mediation before any legal action. Marcus made sure it was ironclad. Derek tried to restart his hauling business in North Las Vegas, but word had gotten around about the vandalism incident and he couldn't get any decent contracts. Last I heard, he was working at a warehouse. The experience taught me a lot about standing my ground and not backing down from bullies. It also taught me the value of having a good lawyer and documenting everything. Marcus became a good friend after that case, and I've sent several other small business owners his way. Running a waste management company might not be glamorous, but it's honest work and it pays well. I've built Crawley Waste Management from a single truck en route to a fleet of 8 trucks covering most of Henderson and parts of North Las Vegas. Meadowbrook Estates remains one of my best accounts, and I've never had a single complaint from the residents. Gerald Thompson turned out to be an excellent HOA president. He streamlined their operations, cut unnecessary expenses, and actually started communicating with vendors like partners instead of servants. The neighborhood improved under his leadership, and property values went up. Sometimes I drive past the house Linda used to own and think about how differently things could have turned out. If I'd backed down, if I'd just accepted the improper termination, Derek would have started operating illegally and probably would have caused serious problems. The HOA would have been liable, residents would have suffered, and my business would have taken a major hit. Instead, I fought back, and everyone ended up better off except for Linda and Derek. They made their choices and faced the consequences. The story spread through the local business community. Other small business owners started calling me for advice when they had contract disputes with HOAs or commercial clients. I always told them the same thing: know your contracts, document everything, get a good lawyer, and don't be afraid to stand up for yourself. I expanded my services to include recycling management and hazardous waste disposal. The licenses were expensive and time-consuming to obtain, but they opened up new revenue streams. Several other HOAs in the area started contracting with me after hearing about how I'd handled the Meadowbrook situation. Apparently, word got around that I was reliable, professional, and not someone who could be pushed around. My crew grew to include 12 full-time employees and several part-time workers for busy seasons. I bought a small warehouse in Henderson to store equipment and manage operations. The business that had started as a way to make a living became something I was genuinely proud of. Marcus helped me set up proper corporate structures to protect my personal assets as the business grew. We formed an LLC, got comprehensive insurance, and made sure every contract was reviewed by an attorney before signing. The legal fees were substantial, but they were worth it to avoid future problems. The Meadowbrook situation had one unexpected benefit. It made me much more careful about which clients I took on. Before signing any new HOA contract, I started doing research on the board members, looking at their meeting minutes, and talking to other vendors about their experiences. If an HOA had a history of unreasonable demands or difficult leadership, I passed on the contract. There were plenty of good clients out there, and I didn't need the headaches. Gerald and I became friends over the years. He invited me to neighborhood barbecues and HOA events. His term as president lasted 3 years, and when he stepped down, he made sure his successor understood the importance of maintaining good vendor relationships. The new president, Maria Valdez, was a retired teacher who ran the HOA with common sense and fairness. I got married 2 years after the incident. My wife, Zara Pemberton, owned a landscaping company and had her own horror stories about difficult HOA clients. We met at a small business networking event and bonded over shared experiences dealing with unreasonable people. She understood the challenges of running a service business and never complained when I had to take emergency calls at odd hours. We bought a house in Henderson, not in an HOA community. After everything I'd been through, the last thing I wanted was to deal with an HOA in my personal life. Our house was in an older neighborhood where people owned their property outright and could paint their houses whatever color they wanted. Business continued to grow. I added commercial accounts at shopping centers and office complexes. The recession that hit in the mid-20s actually helped my business because property managers were looking for reliable, cost-effective waste management solutions. I kept my prices competitive and my service quality high, and I rarely lost accounts. The waste management industry isn't exciting, but it's essential. People don't think about their trash until it doesn't get picked up. Then it becomes the most important thing in the world. That's job security right there. As long as people produce waste, I'll have work. I sometimes wondered what happened to Linda after she moved to Arizona. Did she join another HOA board and try the same tricks? Did she learn anything from the experience? I doubted it. People like Linda rarely changed. They just found new places to create problems. Derek dropped off my radar completely. The restitution payments came regularly for about 18 months until his obligation was fulfilled. After that, I never heard from him again. I hoped he'd learned his lesson about taking shortcuts and breaking the law, but I wasn't optimistic. The criminal justice system had worked reasonably well in this case. Derek had been caught, prosecuted, and punished appropriately. The restitution covered most of my actual damages, though it didn't compensate for the stress and hassle. But that's life. Sometimes you deal with problems and move on. My relationship with Meadowbrook Estates remained strong. I showed up on time, every time, and provided excellent service. The residents appreciated it, and I appreciated their business. It was a mutually beneficial relationship, the way it should have been from the start. The incident taught me that contracts are only as good as the people signing them. Linda had signed a contract with no intention of honoring it if something better came along. She thought she could bully me into walking away, and when that didn't work, she tried to use her nephew to force me out. Every step of the way, she'd underestimated my resolve and overestimated her own authority. Marcus filed a complaint with the Nevada Real Estate Division about Linda's conduct as HOA president. They investigated and found multiple violations of HOA governance requirements, including holding unauthorized meetings, making decisions outside her authority, and failing to disclose conflicts of interest. She was fined $5,000 personally, separate from anything the HOA had to pay. The legal system had worked, slowly but surely. It took months to resolve everything, but in the end, justice was served. The good guys won, the bad guys faced consequences, and life moved on. I expanded into commercial recycling services, which required additional certifications and equipment. It was a growing market as businesses became more environmentally conscious and local regulations required better waste separation. I hired a specialist in recycling operations and bought equipment to handle cardboard, plastics, and metal recycling. The recycling division became profitable within 18 months, which was faster than I'd expected. Businesses liked having a single vendor handle both waste and recycling, and I could offer competitive rates because I was already servicing their locations. It was a natural expansion that fit perfectly with my existing operations. Zara's landscaping business was growing too. We sometimes referred clients to each other, especially HOAs and commercial properties that needed both services. We kept the businesses completely separate financially and legally, but the informal partnership helped both companies. We talked about having kids someday. Zara wanted to wait until both businesses were more established and we had managers who could handle day-to-day operations. I agreed. Running a business required long hours and constant attention. Adding children to the mix would be challenging, though plenty of business owners made it work. The Nevada heat was brutal in the summer, and waste management was particularly unpleasant when temperatures hit 115 degrees. My crew had to start earlier in the day to avoid the worst heat, finishing routes by noon when possible. I made sure they had plenty of water, sun protection, and frequent breaks. Keeping good employees meant treating them well. Labor was actually my biggest expense and biggest challenge. Finding reliable workers who would show up on time and work hard wasn't easy. I paid above market rates and offered health insurance, which helped attract better candidates. My turnover was lower than industry average, which saved money on training and recruitment. The business side of running a waste management company was more complex than people realized. I had to manage routes efficiently to minimize fuel costs, maintain vehicles to prevent breakdowns, comply with environmental regulations, handle billing and collections, manage employees, negotiate contracts, and deal with problem clients. It wasn't just driving a truck and picking up trash. I took business courses at UNLV's continuing education program, learning about finance, marketing, and operations management. The education helped me make better decisions and avoid common mistakes. I also joined the Nevada Waste Management Association, which provided networking opportunities and industry updates. The association meetings were where I heard about other vendors having similar problems with HOAs. Unreasonable demands, attempts to break contracts, refusals to pay for services rendered. It was a common pattern, especially with HOAs run by people who treated their position like a personal fiefdom rather than a responsibility to serve homeowners. I shared my story at one association meeting, and other vendors approached me afterward to ask how I'd handled things. I emphasized the importance of having a solid contract, documenting everything, and being willing to fight for your rights. Several vendors told me they'd been pushed around by HOAs and had just walked away rather than deal with the hassle. That was a mistake, in my opinion. Every time a vendor walked away from an unreasonable client without fighting back, it encouraged that client to treat the next vendor the same way. Someone had to draw a line and say enough. The waste management industry was consolidating, with larger companies buying up smaller operators. I got offers to sell Crawley Waste Management every few months. The offers were substantial, enough that I could retire comfortably if I wanted. But I wasn't ready to walk away from something I'd built. There was satisfaction in running a successful business, in providing good service, in employing people and supporting their families. The money was important, but it wasn't everything. I enjoyed the work, strange as that might sound. I liked solving logistical problems, maintaining equipment, and building relationships with clients. Zara understood because she felt the same way about her landscaping business. We were both entrepreneurs who'd built something from nothing. We understood the pride that came from creating value and serving customers well. The HOA industry in Nevada was massive, with thousands of planned communities throughout the Las Vegas Valley. Most were managed reasonably well, but there were always a few problem associations run by people who abused their authority. I learned to identify red flags during initial contract negotiations and avoid the worst ones. My business model focused on quality service at fair prices with ironclad contracts. I didn't try to be the cheapest option because that led to cutting corners and poor service. I positioned Crawley Waste Management as the reliable, professional choice. It worked. My client retention rate was above 90%, which was excellent for the industry. The Meadowbrook incident became a turning point that defined how I ran my business going forward. I stopped tolerating unreasonable client demands. I enforced contract terms strictly. I documented everything meticulously, and I never hesitated to involve lawyers when necessary. Some people might call that being difficult or inflexible. I called it being professional and protecting my business. The clients who appreciated quality service understood. The ones who wanted a pushover vendor could look elsewhere. Gerald Thompson remained HOA president for his full 3-year term before stepping down. He transformed Meadowbrook Estates from a poorly run association into a model community. Property values increased, resident satisfaction improved, and vendor relationships were professional and fair. It showed what good leadership could accomplish. Linda Patterson's tenure had been destructive, focused on personal agendas rather than community welfare. Her attempt to give her unqualified nephew a contract could have caused serious problems for residents. Trash piling up in the Nevada heat created health hazards, attracted pests, and violated county regulations. The HOA could have faced tens of thousands in fines, not to mention lawsuits from angry homeowners. By standing firm, I'd prevented all that. It wasn't heroic, just practical business sense combined with a refusal to be bullied. But the outcome had been positive for everyone except Linda and Derek. The community recognized that eventually. At a Meadowbrook neighborhood event, 2 years after the incident, several residents approached me to thank me for fighting to keep servicing their community. They'd learned the full story from Gerald and appreciated that I hadn't just walked away when things got difficult. That recognition meant more to me than any amount of money. Building a reputation as someone who could be counted on, who stood by their commitments, who treated people fairly but didn't get pushed around, that was valuable beyond measure. My business continued to grow steadily. I added 2 more trucks and expanded into Boulder City, a smaller community southeast of Las Vegas. The expansion was carefully planned, with proper licensing and enough capacity to handle the new routes without sacrificing service quality on existing accounts. Zara and I celebrated our business successes together. We understood each other's challenges and victories in ways that other couples might not. When I landed a major new contract, she understood the work that had gone into it. When she completed a complex landscaping project, I appreciated the planning and execution required. We built a good life together in Henderson. The house needed work when we bought it, but we fixed it up slowly, doing some projects ourselves and hiring contractors for others. It became our sanctuary, a place to escape from business pressures and just be together. The waste management business kept me grounded, literally. There was nothing glamorous about emptying dumpsters and hauling trash, but it was honest work that people needed, and I did it well. That counted for something. Looking back on the whole situation with Linda and Meadowbrook, I saw it as a defining moment. I could have backed down, taken the easy path, avoided the conflict. Instead, I fought for what was right and won. That experience gave me confidence to face other challenges, knowing I could stand up to pressure and come out on top. The business world respected strength. Clients might not always like that I enforced contract terms strictly, but they respected it. They knew where they stood with me, knew I'd deliver what I promised, but also expected them to honor their commitments. That clarity was valuable. Derek's vandalism of my truck had been stupid and impulsive. It had seemed intimidating at the time, but it had actually strengthened my legal position and led to criminal charges against him. His aunt's scheming had backfired completely, costing the HOA money, damaging the community, and ending her leadership role. Sometimes the bad guys really did lose and the good guys won. It didn't always happen, but when it did, it restored faith in the system. The Nevada legal system had worked reasonably well throughout the process. The police had investigated the vandalism professionally. The county licensing board had enforced regulations appropriately. The courts had handled Derek's criminal case fairly. The HOA's internal governance processes had ultimately corrected Linda's abuses. It wasn't perfect, but it had functioned. Marcus Rivera had been worth every penny of his legal fees. A good attorney was essential for any business owner. Trying to handle legal matters alone was foolish and expensive in the long run. Marcus had guided me through the contract dispute, settlement negotiations, and criminal investigation smoothly. I referred other business owners to Marcus regularly. He'd built a solid practice representing small businesses in contract disputes, employment matters, and general business law. We both understood that reputation was everything in Las Vegas's business community. Do good work, treat people fairly, and success would follow. The waste management industry wasn't going anywhere. People would always produce trash. Businesses would always need disposal services, and regulations would continue requiring licensed professional operators. My business had staying power because it filled a genuine need. I thought about expanding further, maybe into commercial construction, debris removal, or hazardous waste services. Both required specialized equipment and licensing, but both were growing markets. The investment would be substantial, but the potential returns were attractive. Zara encouraged me to pursue opportunities that interested me. She was doing the same with her landscaping business, adding services like irrigation system installation and landscape design. We were both builders, always looking for ways to grow and improve. The years after the Meadowbrook incident were good. Business grew, relationships strengthened, and life felt stable. The drama with Linda seemed like ancient history, a story I occasionally told at business networking events to illustrate the importance of standing firm on principles. Young entrepreneurs sometimes asked me for advice. I told them to get everything in writing, document thoroughly, build relationships with good professionals like lawyers and accountants, and never let anyone bully them out of what they'd earned. Fair contract terms had to be enforced consistently, or they became meaningless. The waste management business required early mornings. Routes started at dawn to avoid traffic and heat. I was usually awake by 4:30 a.m., reviewing schedules and checking equipment before crews headed out. It was a demanding lifestyle, but I'd adjusted to it over the years. Zara's landscaping work followed a different rhythm, with crews working during cooler morning hours in summer and throughout the day in winter. We coordinated our schedules to spend time together, despite the demands of running separate businesses. Henderson continued growing, with new housing developments and commercial centers creating opportunities for both waste management and landscaping services. The Las Vegas Valley's population kept expanding, and growth was good for business. I maintained my commitment to excellent service. Every route was completed on schedule unless genuinely impossible circumstances prevented it. Equipment was maintained meticulously to prevent breakdowns. Employees were trained properly and treated well. Clients received responsive communication and professional service. That reliability had built Crawley Waste Management's reputation. We weren't the biggest waste management company in Nevada, but we were known for quality and dependability. That reputation was worth more than any marketing campaign could buy. The story of standing up to Linda and the Meadowbrook HOA became part of my business identity. It showed that I couldn't be pushed around, that I honored my commitments, and that I expected others to honor theirs. Those were good qualities to be known for. Gerald Thompson called me occasionally to chat about business and community matters. He'd retired from his career in engineering and devoted more time to community service. He served on several nonprofit boards and volunteered extensively. His leadership had made a real difference at Meadowbrook. Maria Valdez, who took over as HOA president after Gerald, maintained his standards. She ran efficient meetings, communicated clearly with vendors and residents, and made decisions based on what was best for the community rather than personal agendas. Meadowbrook thrived under her leadership. The contrast between Linda's approach and Gerald and Maria's approach couldn't have been clearer. Linda had treated the HOA presidency as a source of personal power to benefit herself and her family. Gerald and Maria treated it as a responsibility to serve their neighbors. The results spoke for themselves. I wondered if Linda had learned anything from her removal and the consequences her nephew faced. Probably not. People with her mindset rarely acknowledged their mistakes or changed their behavior. They just found new situations where they could exercise power over others. That was sad, in a way. Linda could have been a decent HOA president if she'd focused on serving her community rather than advancing personal interests. She'd had the energy and organizational skills. She just channeled them in the wrong direction. Derek might have had a future in the waste management industry if he'd gone about it legitimately. Getting proper licensing and building a business the right way took time and effort, but it was possible. Instead, he tried to take shortcuts with his aunt's help, and it had blown up in his face. The lesson there was obvious. Do things right, even when it's harder and takes longer. Cutting corners might seem attractive in the short term, but it usually led to bigger problems down the road. My business philosophy emphasized doing things right. Proper licensing, environmental compliance, employee safety, reliable service, fair pricing, honest communication. It wasn't complicated, but it required discipline and commitment. That approach had built a successful business and a reputation I was proud of. Crawley Waste Management stood for quality and reliability. When I eventually retired or sold the business, that reputation would be the most valuable asset I could pass on. The waste management industry would continue evolving. New technologies for waste reduction and recycling were constantly emerging. Environmental regulations were becoming stricter. Customer expectations were rising. Staying current required ongoing investment and learning. I attended industry conferences and trade shows to learn about new developments. I invested in modern equipment that improved efficiency and reduced environmental impact. I adapted my business practices to meet changing regulations and customer needs. The core business remained the same, picking up waste and disposing of it properly. But the details were constantly changing, and successful operators adapted while maintaining their fundamental commitment to quality service. Looking back over everything that had happened since that Monday morning when Linda knocked on my truck window, I felt grateful for how things had turned out. The conflict had been stressful and expensive, but fighting back had been the right decision. I'd kept my business, expanded my services, improved my contracts, and built stronger relationships with good clients. Linda had lost her position, damaged her reputation, and had to leave the community. Derek had a criminal record and substantial financial consequences. The outcomes reflected the choices each of us had made. The Meadowbrook Estates community was better off with Gerald and Maria's leadership than it had been under Linda. Residents received reliable waste management services at fair prices. The HOA operated transparently and professionally. Property values increased as the neighborhood improved. Everyone won except the people who tried to cheat the system. That was justice, imperfect but real. My phone rang while I was thinking about all this. It was Maria Valdez from Meadowbrook. "Ethan, I wanted to let you know the board voted last night to renew your contract for another 5 years when the current one expires. We want to lock in your services long term." "That's great news, Maria. I appreciate the confidence. You've earned it. Your service has been excellent, and we know we can count on you. I'll have our attorney send the contract details to Marcus for review." After we hung up, I smiled. 6 years after Linda had tried to fire me, I had a new 5-year contract that would take me through another decade of serving Meadowbrook Estates. The community that had almost thrown me out now wanted to ensure I'd be their waste hauler for years to come. That felt good. Really good. I called Zara to share the news. She whooped with excitement and said we should celebrate with dinner at our favorite steakhouse. I agreed immediately. Sometimes standing your ground and fighting for what's right led to years of positive results. The Meadowbrook situation had tested me, strengthened me, and ultimately proved that refusing to be bullied was the right choice. My business was solid, my reputation was strong, and my future looked bright. All because I'd refused to back down when a HOA president with a conflict of interest had tried to push me out. The waste management business wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I'd built it through hard work, smart decisions, and refusing to compromise on quality or integrity. That was something to be proud of, something worth fighting for. As I drove home that evening, passing through Henderson's growing neighborhoods and commercial districts, I felt satisfied with where life had taken me. The journey from that confrontation with Linda to this moment had been challenging, but it had been worth every difficult step. Sometimes in life, you face a moment where you have to decide whether to stand up or back down. I'd chosen to stand up, and it had made all the difference.